The whispers followed Olivia Zeller like a shadow on the dusty streets of Terlingua, Texas. "Too big for any man to handle," they'd say, not caring that their words carried on the dry desert wind. At 22, Olivia had grown accustomed to the stares, the snickers, and the pity that trailed behind her substantial frame. Yet nothing prepared her for the day in 1873 when Franklin Dawson rode into town, forever changing the course of her seemingly predetermined fate. Franklin dismounted his chestnut stallion outside the general store, his lean frame casting a long shadow in the afternoon sun. At 25, he had already made a name for himself as one of the most skilled cattle drivers in Brewster County, with hands calloused from years of honest work and eyes that squinted against both sun and scrutiny. His cotton shirt clung to his broad shoulders, dampened by sweat from the relentless Texas heat as he tipped his hat to passers-by. "Afternoon," he greeted the storekeeper, his voice deep and measured. "Need supplies for the Double Creek Ranch. Mr. Peterson sent me with a list." Inside the store, Olivia stood behind the counter, having taken over while her father recovered from a bout of fever. Her honey-colored hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her cheeks flushed as the stranger entered. She smoothed down her calico dress, painfully aware of how the fabric strained against her generous figure. "I can help you with that," she offered, reaching for the piece of paper in Franklin's hand. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she quickly withdrew hers, unused to such contact with men outside her family. Franklin hardly seemed to notice her discomfort. Instead, his eyes lingered on her face not with the usual pity or disgust she had grown to expect, but with genuine appreciation for the warmth in her amber eyes. "Much obliged, Miss Zeller." "Olivia Zeller," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father owns this establishment." Franklin Dawson. He removed his hat, revealing a mop of dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Everyone calls me Frank." As Olivia gathered the items on his list, sacks of flour, sugar, coffee beans, and ammunition, she could feel his gaze following her movements. Not once did his eyes settle on her size with judgment, which unnerved her more than the usual stares. "You're new to Terlingua," she stated, carefully measuring coffee beans into a burlap sack. "Been working at Double Creek for about 6 months now," Frank replied. "Don't make it into town much." "That explains it," Olivia nodded. "I know most folks around here, and they know you, I imagine." There was something in the way he said it, not as an accusation or assumption, but as a simple observation that made Olivia glance up. Their eyes met across the counter, and for the first time in years, she didn't immediately look away in embarrassment. "Small towns have long memories and loose tongues, Mr. Dawson." "Frank," he corrected. "And I don't put much stock in town talk. People waste too much breath on matters that don't concern them." The corner of Olivia's mouth twitched upward. "That's a rare perspective in these parts." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on Terlingua's main street, casting long shadows as townsfolk went about their business. Through the window, Olivia could see Mrs. Whitley and her daughter Alina whispering as they peered into the store, no doubt wondering why the handsome ranch hand was spending so much time collecting simple supplies. Frank followed her gaze and frowned slightly. "Friends of yours?" Olivia's short laugh held no humor. "Hardly. Alina was quick to inform me last Sunday that no dress in Texas could make me suitable for the upcoming Founders' Day dance." The words had slipped out before she could stop them, and Olivia immediately regretted her candor. She busied herself with tying the flour sack, avoiding Frank's eyes. "Seems to me," Frank said after a thoughtful pause, "that some folks mistake cruelty for cleverness." "And some mistake size for character," Olivia responded quietly, finally looking up. Something shifted in Frank's expression, a hardening around his eyes, not directed at her, but at the unfairness of her situation. "My mother was a woman of substantial presence," he said carefully. "She also had the kindest heart and the most beautiful singing voice in all of Kentucky. My father said he fell in love with her voice first, then her heart, and everything else was just more of her to cherish." Olivia stared at him, uncertain how to respond to such openness from a virtual stranger. Before she could formulate a reply, the door swung open, and her father entered, still pale from his illness but determined to return to work. "Papa, you should be resting," Olivia admonished, moving around the counter to help him to a chair. "Been resting long enough," Samuel Zeller insisted, though he didn't refuse the seat. His gaze settled on Frank. "Don't believe we've met, young man. Franklin Dawson, sir, working over at Double Creek. Samuel Zeller." He extended his hand, which Frank shook firmly. "I see my daughter's been helping you." "She has indeed. Most helpful person I've encountered in Terlingua." Frank's eyes briefly met Olivia's, and she felt a warmth creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. After Frank paid for his supplies and loaded them onto his horse, he paused at the door. "Miss Zeller, I was wondering if you might consider saving me a dance at the Founders' Day celebration." The store fell silent. Samuel Zeller's eyebrows shot up and Olivia stood frozen, certain she had misheard. I don't dance, Mr. Dawson," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone can dance," Frank countered with a gentle smile. "Some just haven't found the right partner yet." With that, he placed his hat back on his head, tipped it slightly, and was gone, leaving Olivia staring after him in bewildered silence. "Well," Samuel said after a long moment, "that's not something you see every day." "He was just being kind, Papa," Olivia dismissed, returning to her duties behind the counter. Though her hands trembled slightly, Samuel watched his daughter carefully. "Maybe so, but kindness is a rare enough quality that it shouldn't be dismissed so easily." The days that followed found Olivia thinking about Frank far more than she cared to admit. She told herself it was simply the novelty of being treated with respect by an attractive man, nothing more. Yet she caught herself glancing toward the door whenever it opened, hoping to see his tall frame and easy smile. A week later, her wish was granted. Frank returned to the store, this time without a list from Mr. Peterson. "Miss Zeller," he greeted, removing his hat. "I find myself in need of some peppermint sticks." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Peppermint sticks? In August?" "I have a powerful craving for something sweet," Frank replied, his eyes never leaving hers. Samuel, who was sorting mail in the corner, coughed loudly, poorly disguising his amusement. "We have some in the glass jar there," Olivia indicated, trying to maintain her composure. "How many would you like?" "Just 2, Frank said, reaching for his coin purse. "One for me and one for you if you'll accept it." Olivia stared at him, searching for signs of mockery but finding none. "Mr. Dawson, Frank," he corrected again. "Frank," she conceded. "I'm not sure what your intentions are, but if this is some kind of jest—" "No jest," he interrupted firmly. "Just a man offering a sweet to a woman whose company he enjoys. Nothing more complicated than that." Samuel suddenly found reason to step outside, mumbling something about checking the mail delivery, leaving them alone in the store. Olivia carefully removed 2 peppermint sticks from the jar, her pulse quickening as Frank's fingers brushed hers when she handed them over. He paid for both, then extended one back to her. "I've been thinking about what you said," Frank continued as she hesitantly accepted the candy. "About not dancing. The Founders' Day celebration is still 2 weeks away. That's plenty of time for practice if you'd be willing." "Practice?" Olivia repeated, confusion evident in her voice. My mother always said that dancing is just walking with purpose, Frank explained, his expression earnest. I'd be honored to show you if you'd let me. Olivia's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from inevitable disappointment or, worse, public humiliation. But something in Frank's steady gaze made her pause. Why? She finally asked, the simple question carrying the weight of years of self-doubt. Frank seemed to understand all that single word encompassed. He took his time answering, as if knowing the importance of his response. Because when I look at you, Olivia Zeller, I see someone worth knowing, he said softly. And because I suspect that behind your caution is a woman who deserves to dance if she wants to, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The use of her first name, spoken with such care, sent a shiver through Olivia that had nothing to do with fear. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that someone might see beyond her size to the person she was inside. Sunday afternoon, she said before she could change her mind. After church, there's a clearing behind our house with enough privacy for practice. The smile that spread across Frank's face was bright enough to rival the Texas sun. Sunday it is, then. True to his word, Frank appeared at the Zeller home that Sunday afternoon. He had traded his work clothes for a clean shirt and his best pair of denims, his dark hair still damp from washing. Olivia had spent an agonizing hour deciding what to wear, before settling on a simple blue dress that her mother had made for her, before passing 3 years prior. Samuel Zeller, both protective and hopeful, made it clear that he would be sitting on the porch reading his newspaper, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to offer some semblance of privacy. He seems like a decent young man, Samuel told his daughter as they watched Frank approach from the road. But decent or not, you're still my little girl. Olivia squeezed her father's hand, grateful for his support despite the fact that at 22 she was hardly a little girl, and had never been little in any sense of the word. In the clearing behind the house, with only the rustling leaves and chirping birds as witnesses, Frank began his lesson. Dancing is a conversation without words, he explained, standing before Olivia with respectful distance between them. It doesn't matter what size or shape the dancers are. What matters is the rhythm they create together. He demonstrated a simple box step, his movements fluid despite his usual life on horseback. Olivia watched, simultaneously entranced and terrified by the prospect of attempting to match his grace. "Your turn," Frank encouraged, extending his hand. Olivia's heart pounded as she placed her hand in his. "I'm going to step on your feet," she warned. "Then I'll consider myself fortunate to have sturdy boots," he replied with a grin. Their first attempts were indeed clumsy. Olivia's movements were stiff, her attention divided between counting steps and maintaining an appropriate distance from Frank. But he remained patient, his guidance gentle and free from judgment. "You're thinking too much," Frank observed after several awkward minutes. "Dancing isn't a puzzle to solve. It's more like riding with the wind instead of against it." "Easy for you to say," Olivia muttered, her face flushed with exertion and embarrassment. "You weren't born with 2 left feet and enough weight to crush a man's toes." Frank stopped moving, his hand still lightly holding hers. "Olivia," he said, his tone serious enough to make her look up. "Has it occurred to you that I might be nervous too?" She blinked in surprise. "You? What do you have to be nervous about?" "Making a fool of myself in front of the most interesting woman I've met since coming to Texas," he answered honestly. "Being rejected, stepping on your dress and tearing it. The usual concerns a man has when dancing with a lady he admires." The word admires hung in the air between them, as tangible as the afternoon heat. Olivia searched his face for signs of insincerity but found none. "Why don't we try again?" she suggested softly, her voice steadier than before. "This time I'll try riding with the wind, as you put it." Frank's smile returned, genuine and warm. "That's the spirit." They began again, and this time Olivia allowed herself to feel the rhythm rather than count the steps. Gradually, her movements became more fluid, her body responding to the subtle guidance of Frank's hands. When he hummed a gentle waltz, the melody seemed to flow through them both, connecting them in ways that transcended physical touch. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Olivia was dancing, truly dancing, with a lightness she had never thought possible. When Frank finally released her hands, she felt strangely bereft, as if something precious had been taken away. "You're a natural," Frank declared, his eyes bright with admiration. "Just needed a little confidence, that's all." "And a patient teacher," Olivia added, surprising herself with her boldness. From the porch, Samuel cleared his throat loudly, a not-so-subtle reminder of his presence and the advancing hour. "Same time next Sunday?" Frank asked, walking Olivia back toward the house. "For more practice before the celebration." "I'd like that," she replied, her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the weeks passed, their Sunday dance lessons became the highlight of Olivia's existence. Frank proved to be not just a patient teacher, but a fascinating companion. He told her about growing up in Kentucky with 4 brothers, about his decision to head west after his parents died, and about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch. In turn, Olivia shared stories of her childhood in Terlingua, of her mother's kindness and creativity, and of her own secret wish to someday travel beyond the boundaries of their small town. Each Sunday, they grew more comfortable with each other, their dancing more synchronized, their conversations deeper. Sometimes, Samuel would play simple tunes on his harmonica, providing a soundtrack for their practice. Other times, Frank would bring his guitar, filling the clearing with melodies that seemed to capture the growing feeling between them, unnamed but undeniable. The townsfolk noticed the developing friendship. Whispers followed Olivia now more than ever, but they carried a different tone: disbelief rather than mockery, speculation instead of pity. Eleanor Whitley made a point of mentioning, within Olivia's hearing at church, that Frank must surely be planning to return to Kentucky soon, as Terlingua clearly had nothing to hold his interest for the long term. The comment stung, resurrecting doubts that Olivia had begun to overcome. That Sunday, her dancing was distracted, her responses to Frank's conversation half-hearted. "Something's troubling you," Frank observed as they took a break beneath the shade of an oak tree. "Is it about the celebration next Saturday?" "In a way," Olivia admitted, picking at a loose thread on her skirt. "Frank, are you planning to stay in Terlingua?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I hadn't given it much thought. My contract with Double Creek runs through the winter." He studied her face carefully. "Why do you ask?" Olivia took a deep breath. "Some people seem to think your interest in our dancing lessons is temporary, that you'll move on once the novelty wears off." Understanding dawned in Frank's eyes, followed quickly by indignation. These some people, would they happen to include Eleanor Whitley and her gossiping mother? Olivia's silence was answer enough. Frank shifted to face her more directly. "Olivia, I need you to hear me clearly. I didn't ask to teach you to dance because I pitied you or because I was bored and looking for amusement. I asked because from the moment I walked into that store, I saw something in you that drew me in: a kindness, an intelligence, a quiet strength that outshines everyone else in this town." His words washed over her like a cool breeze on a hot day, soothing yet almost too much to absorb. "But you must see how people look at us," she protested weakly. "A man like you and a woman like me, a hard-working man and a compassionate woman," Frank interrupted firmly. That's all I see. And if others can't see the same, then their vision is poorer than mine after 3 days in a dust storm." Olivia laughed despite herself, the tension easing from her shoulders. Frank reached out slowly, telegraphing his intentions, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I can't promise I'll stay in Terlingua forever," he said truthfully. "But I can promise that whatever decisions I make about my future will be my own, not dictated by town gossip or others' expectations." It wasn't quite the reassurance Olivia had hoped for, but its honesty made it more valuable than empty promises. The day of the Founders' Day celebration arrived with clear skies and a festive atmosphere. Terlingua's town square was transformed with bunting and lanterns, tables laden with food prepared by the women of the community, and a wooden platform constructed for dancing. A small band of local musicians tuned their instruments as townspeople began to gather in their finest clothes. Olivia stood before her mirror, her stomach in knots. The dress she wore was new, sewn secretly by Mrs. Rodriguez, the town's dressmaker who had known Olivia's mother well. Unlike her usual shapeless garments, this dress, a deep green that complemented her amber eyes, was designed to flatter her figure rather than conceal it. It followed her curves with respect, the fabric gathering and flowing in ways that emphasized her womanly shape while maintaining propriety. "Your mother would have been proud," Samuel said from the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. "You look beautiful, Olivia." "I'm terrified, Papa," she confessed, turning to face him. "What if I forget all the steps? What if people laugh?" "Then you'll remember that you're Samuel and Margaret Zeller's daughter," he replied firmly. "And Zellers don't crumble under the weight of other people's opinions." With her father at her side, Olivia made her way to the town square. She felt the stares immediately, some curious, some judgmental, some simply surprised by her transformation. But for once, she held her head high, focusing on the anticipation of seeing Frank rather than the discomfort of being observed. He was waiting near the edge of the gathering, his tall frame easy to spot even in the growing crowd. When he caught sight of her, the open admiration in his expression was enough to silence the last of her doubts. Frank had traded his usual attire for a proper suit, somewhat worn but well-fitted, and had tamed his unruly hair for the occasion. "Miss Zeller," he greeted formally, extending his arm to her. "You take my breath away." "Mr. Dawson," she responded with equal formality, though her lips curved into a smile as she placed her hand on his arm. "You clean up rather well yourself." The evening progressed with food and speeches, with children running between tables and old-timers recounting tales of Terlingua's founding. Throughout it all, Frank remained by Olivia's side, his presence both a comfort and a statement to the community. When the band finally struck up a lively tune and couples began moving toward the dance floor, Olivia felt a moment of panic. "Remember," Frank murmured close to her ear, "it's just like our practice, only you and me, riding with the wind." He led her to the edge of the platform, waiting for the current song to end before escorting her onto the wooden floor. There was a brief lull in conversation as people noticed them taking position, but Frank seemed oblivious to the attention. The music began again, a gentle waltz that matched the rhythm they had practiced so many times. With his hand at her waist and hers on his shoulder, they began to move. The first few steps were tentative, Olivia's focus internal as she counted beats and tried to ignore the watching eyes. "Look at me," Frank encouraged softly. "Not at them, just me." She raised her eyes to his, and the world around them seemed to recede. In his gaze she found nothing but warmth, respect, and something deeper that made her heart race. Their bodies moved in harmony, each step and turn executed with a grace that belied their different physiques. What might have appeared incongruous, his lean frame, and her generous one instead complemented each other perfectly, like two halves of a whole finding balance. As they danced, the whispers gradually gave way to murmurs of appreciation. Even a leaner Whitley, standing at the edge of the dance floor with a sour expression, couldn't deny the beauty of their synchronized movements. By the time the song ended, several people were applauding not mockingly, but with genuine admiration for the couple's skill. Breathless and flushed with both exertion and joy, Olivia curtsied as Frank bowed. Before she could suggest they step aside, the band launched into another tune and Frank raised an eyebrow in silent question. With a smile, Olivia nodded, and they continued to dance. That night changed everything. Where once there had been pity or ridicule, the town of Terlingua now viewed Olivia Zeller with new eyes, not just because of her dancing prowess, but because of the confidence she exuded in Franklin Dawson's company. And as for Frank himself, any doubts about his intentions were laid to rest when, in full view of the entire town, he escorted Olivia home at the evening's end and, with Samuel Zeller's blessing, kissed her hand at the doorstep with unmistakable devotion. The autumn of 1873 passed in a whirlwind of Sunday afternoons that now included not just dancing but long walks, picnics by the creek, and evenings on the Zeller's porch, where Frank would play his guitar while Olivia sang songs her mother had taught her. Their courtship, unconventional as it might have seemed to outsiders, was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection that deepened with each passing week. In December, as a rare dusting of snow covered Terlingua, Frank appeared at the general store with an unusual nervousness about him. He waited until the last customer had left before approaching Olivia at the counter. "I've been speaking with Mr. Peterson," he said without preamble, "about purchasing a parcel of land that borders Double Creek to the east." Olivia looked up from her ledger, noting the intensity in his expression. "Oh, is it good grazing land?" "It is," Frank confirmed. "But more importantly, it has a natural spring, several mature pecan trees, and a clearing that would be perfect for building a house." He paused, his eyes searching hers. A family home. The implication hung in the air between them. Olivia's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain composed. "That sounds like a significant investment. The most important one I'll ever make," Frank agreed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Which is why I wanted to ask you something first." Samuel, who had been pretending to organize shelves nearby, suddenly developed an intense interest in the storage room and disappeared through the back door, giving them privacy. Frank opened the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm, a simple gold band with a small pearl set at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing but dreams and determination." Olivia stared at the ring, unable to form words as emotion welled up inside her. "Olivia Zeller," Frank continued, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his eyes. "I came to Terlingua looking for work, not expecting to find the woman I want to spend my life with. You've shown me what true beauty is, not just in appearance, but in character and kindness, in the way you face a world that hasn't always been kind to you. I love you, and I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as the reality of his proposal sank in. "People will talk," she whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "They'll say you could do better, that I'm too big, too different, that it won't last." "Let them talk," Frank replied with quiet conviction. "We know the truth. And 50 years from now, when we're sitting on our porch watching our grandchildren play, they'll still be talking about how wrong they were." The image he painted of a lifetime together, of family, of proving the doubters wrong through the simple act of loving each other, was powerful enough to sweep away the last of Olivia's hesitation. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll marry you, Franklin Dawson. And we will make it last, no matter what anyone says." The news of their engagement spread through Terlingua faster than wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some offered sincere congratulations, while others made barely concealed bets on how long the unusual match would endure. Eleanor Whitley was overheard at the dressmaker's shop wagering that the cowboy will come to his senses before spring, while her mother suggested that he must be after Samuel Zeller's store, because why else would a man like that settle for such a large bride? The cruel words reached Olivia, as they always did, but they found less purchase in her heart than before. Frank's love had become a shield against the barbs of small-minded people, and her own growing confidence served as armor. They were married on a clear February morning in 1874, with Samuel proudly walking his daughter down the aisle of Terlingua's small church. Olivia wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Rodriguez had sewn with meticulous care, designed to celebrate rather than disguise her figure. Frank stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Olivia as she approached. "Never seen a man look at a woman with such love," Samuel remarked later to Reverend Phillips. "Like she's the only person in the room." "To him, she probably is," the Reverend replied wisely. "That's the kind of love that endures." The newlyweds moved into a temporary cabin on their land while Frank, with help from friends from Double Creek, began construction on their permanent home. Olivia threw herself into creating a comfortable living space, using skills her mother had taught her to transform simple surroundings into a warm haven. She planted a vegetable garden, learned to bake bread in the temperamental iron stove, and rode with Frank to check the small herd of cattle he had started with his savings. Life on the frontier was hard for everyone, but particularly challenging for Olivia. Simple tasks required more effort because of her size, and the physical demands of ranch life tested her endurance daily. Yet she faced each challenge with determination, adapting methods to suit her capabilities rather than lamenting her limitations. Frank, for his part, never treated her size as an obstacle. He built furniture that accommodated her comfortably, designed their home with wider doorways and sturdier floors, and always found ways to express his appreciation for the fullness of her figure. In their private moments, he showed her that her body was not something to be ashamed of, but celebrated a source of warmth, comfort, and pleasure. By their first anniversary, they had moved into their completed home, a sturdy structure with a wide front porch facing east toward the sunrise. The house stood as physical proof of their commitment, built to last through Texas storms and scorching summers. Like their marriage, it was constructed with care, attention to detail, and an eye toward the future. That spring brought another change when Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child. The news was met with joy, but also trepidation. Childbirth was dangerous for any woman on the frontier, but potentially more so for someone of Olivia's size. Frank immediately rode to El Paso to bring back Dr. Harrison, who had a reputation as the most skilled physician in the region. "The baby appears healthy," Dr. Harrison confirmed after examining Olivia. "But I won't sugarcoat this, there are risks. I recommend you come stay in El Paso for the final month so I can monitor you closely." The concern in Frank's eyes was evident, but Olivia squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We'll face this together," she said, "like everything else." True to their word, they traveled to El Paso when Olivia entered her 8th month. Frank rented a room near the doctor's home and divided his time between caring for his wife and making brief trips back to check on their ranch. The separation was difficult, but the priority was clear: Olivia's health and the safe delivery of their child. On a sweltering July day in 1875, after 27 hours of labor that tested Olivia's strength and Frank's nerves, Samuel Franklin Dawson entered the world with a powerful cry that belied his small size. Despite the difficult delivery, both mother and son emerged healthy, much to Dr. Harrison's relief. "You have a fighter there," the doctor told the exhausted but radiant Olivia as she cradled her son. "Strong like his parents." Frank, who had worn a path in the floor with his pacing during the delivery, sat beside them on the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Just like his mother." Their return to the ranch was celebrated by neighbors who had doubted their union but had gradually come to respect the young couple's determination. The arrival of young Samuel cemented their place in the community. They were no longer just the cowboy and his big wife, but the Dawson family, with roots growing deeper by the day. As the years passed, their family expanded. A daughter, Margaret, joined them in 1877, followed by twins Robert and Richard in 1880. Each pregnancy and birth brought challenges, but Olivia faced them with the same quiet courage that characterized everything she did. Frank remained her steadfast partner, his devotion unwavering as they built their life together. Their ranch prospered through a combination of Frank's cattle knowledge and Olivia's business acumen, inherited from her father. They weathered droughts and economic downturns by diversifying, adding pecan orchards, keeping bees for honey, and eventually opening a small trading post that served travelers on the road between Terlingua and Alpine. Through it all, the whispers continued. Each milestone in their marriage was accompanied by renewed speculation about its stability. When they celebrated 5 years together, Eleanor Whitley, now Eleanor Thompson, after a hasty marriage to a passing salesman, commented that the novelty must have worn off by now. At 10 years, the skeptics noted that many marriages fail once the children are older. The 15th anniversary brought murmurs that the hard years of ranch life will surely strain their unusual bond. But the Dawsons continued, year after year, proving the naysayers wrong through their quiet dedication to each other. Their love was not the stuff of fairy tales but something far more durable, built on mutual respect, shared work, and the joy they found in each other's company. On Sunday evenings, long after their children were grown and had families of their own, Frank and Olivia could still be found dancing on their wide front porch, moving together with the same harmony they had discovered in that clearing behind the Zeller home so many years before. Her figure remained generous, with added curves from bearing their children, while his tall frame had grown more weathered but no less strong. Together, they created a picture of enduring love that defied conventional expectations. In 1898, as Terlingua changed with the times, and many original settlers moved on or passed away, the Dawsons celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering that drew people from miles around. Their children and grandchildren filled the ranch with laughter, and even a few of the old-timers who had once bet against their marriage came to pay their respects. "Never thought I'd see the day," admitted Harold Meeks, who had been the saloon-keeper when Frank first arrived in town. "Figured you two were too different to make it work. Glad to be proven wrong for once." Olivia, her honey-colored hair now streaked with silver but her amber eyes still bright, merely smiled. "Love doesn't concern itself with differences, Mr. Meeks, only with what truly matters." Frank, standing proudly beside his wife with his arm around her substantial waist, nodded in agreement. 25 years is just the beginning," he declared. "We're aiming for at least 50. The declaration was met with cheers and raised glasses, the skepticism of the past replaced by recognition of the remarkable bond they had forged. The turn of the century brought changes to the Dawson Ranch. Their eldest son, Samuel, took over much of the daily management, allowing Frank and Olivia to ease into a less demanding routine. Their trading post had grown into a proper store, now run by their daughter Margaret and her husband. The twins, Robert and Richard, managed the expanded cattle operation that now included several neighboring properties. Through it all, Frank and Olivia remained the heart of the family, their relationship serving as the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their home became a gathering place for community events, holiday celebrations, and Sunday dinners that brought together multiple generations. Olivia's size, once the subject of cruel speculation, became associated with her legendary hospitality and the abundance of love she offered to all who entered their home. In 1913, as the world balanced on the edge of great change, the Dawsons prepared to mark their 39th anniversary. Though both were now in their 60s, with the physical limitations that age brings, they maintained the tradition of dancing together each Sunday evening. "My bones creak more than they used to," Frank admitted one night as they swayed gently to the melody he hummed. "And I move slower than a tortoise in January," Olivia replied with a laugh. "But we still make a fine pair, Mr. Dawson." "The finest," he agreed, pulling her closer. "Always have been, always will be." Their 40th anniversary coincided with the outbreak of World War I, casting a shadow over the celebration as two of their grandsons prepared to enlist. The family gathered nonetheless, drawing strength from the enduring example set by Frank and Olivia. "How did you do it?" their granddaughter Emily asked during the celebration. "How did you know it would last when everyone said it wouldn't?" Olivia exchanged a glance with Frank, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. "We didn't know," she answered honestly. "We just decided, every single day, that what we had was worth fighting for. And after a while, those days added up to years, and the years to decades. And we never much cared what other folks thought we should be," Frank added, his voice raspier with age but no less resolute. "We were too busy being who we were meant to be together." The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow. They mourned the loss of their son Richard in the war and celebrated the marriages of grandchildren and the births of great-grandchildren. Through illnesses and hardships, they remained each other's constant, their commitment deepening with each challenge they faced together. As they approached their 50th anniversary in 1924, Terlingua had transformed from the frontier town of their youth into a more established community. The skeptics who had doubted their union had largely been silenced by time or were long gone. What remained was a legacy of love that had influenced not just their own family, but generations of couples who had witnessed their journey. The celebration of their golden anniversary became a community event. The ranch was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, tables groaning with food prepared by daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters who had learned Olivia's recipes. A photographer from Alpine came to document the occasion, capturing images of the elderly couple surrounded by their extensive family: 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. Frank, now 76, his dark hair turned white but his posture still proud, stood before the gathering with Olivia at his side. At 73, she remained a woman of substantial presence, her figure still generous though softened by age, her amber eyes still bright with the same spark that had first captured his attention in the general store so many years ago. "50 years ago," Frank began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I made the best decision of my life when I asked Olivia Zeller to be my wife. Many of you weren't born yet, but those who were might remember that not everyone believed we would last." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the older guests. "They said we were too different," Frank continued. "That I would tire of a woman of Olivia's size, or that she would find life as a rancher's wife too demanding. They placed bets on how quickly our marriage would fail." He turned to face his wife, taking both her hands in his. But they didn't understand what I knew from the beginning, that in Olivia, I had found not just a beautiful woman, but a partner with courage, intelligence, and a heart big enough to match her generous figure. Tears glistened in Olivia's eyes as she gazed up at her husband. And they didn't know that in Frank, I had found a man who truly saw me when others looked right through me. A man whose strength was matched only by his gentleness, and whose love made me believe in myself. Their eldest son, Samuel, stepped forward with 2 golden bands, new rings commissioned for the occasion. "These are from all of us," he said, his own voice thick with emotion, "to replace the ones that have worn thin over 50 years of hard work and constant love." As Frank slipped the new ring onto Olivia's finger, he spoke the same vows he had made half a century earlier, his voice cracking with age but firm with conviction. Olivia did the same, her words a testament to promises kept through decades of partnership. When they finished, Reverend Taylor, who had taken over from Reverend Phillips many years before, addressed the gathering. "What we witness today is nothing short of a miracle, not because lasting love is impossible, but because it requires daily courage and commitment in a world that often values neither. Frank and Olivia Dawson have shown us that love, when nurtured and protected, can flourish despite obstacles and outlast all predictions of its demise." As the celebration continued into the evening, the elderly couple took to the dance floor one more time. Though their movements were slow and careful, the harmony between them was unchanged from their first dance at the Founders' Day celebration, 50 years earlier. They moved together with the ease of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms so thoroughly that dancing had become as natural as breathing. Watching from the sidelines, Eleanor Thompson, now a widow and considerably humbled by life's trials, approached their daughter Margaret. "I owe your parents an apology," she admitted quietly. "I was among those who bet against them. I was wrong, and I've been wrong for 50 years. Margaret smiled kindly at the elderly woman. "Mother always said that love doesn't keep score of rights and wrongs." "You're welcome to tell her yourself, though. I know she'd appreciate hearing it." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and family members began to depart, Eleanor approached Olivia as she rested in a comfortable chair on the porch. "Olivia," she began hesitantly, "I wanted to say. That is, I need to apologize for things I said long ago, about you and Frank. I was unkind and, as it turns out, completely mistaken." Olivia regarded the woman who had once caused her such pain, now diminished by age and regret. "Thank you, Eleanor. That means a great deal. How did you do it?" Eleanor asked, echoing the question Olivia had heard so many times over the decades. "How did you prove us all wrong?" Olivia's gaze drifted to where Frank stood talking with their grandsons, his gestures animated as he recounted some story from their past. "We never set out to prove anyone wrong," she said thoughtfully. "We were too busy proving ourselves right, and in the end that made all the difference." As night fell on the Dawson ranch, the couple sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the vast Texas sky. Frank's arm rested comfortably around Olivia's shoulders, her head leaning against him as it had countless times before. 50 years, he mused softly. "Seems like both forever and no time at all." "The best kind of forever," Olivia agreed, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. Do you remember what you said to me when you proposed? About sitting on this porch 50 years later watching our grandchildren play, Frank chuckled, the sound warm in the evening air. I do. Turned out to be great-grandchildren, too. I'd say we exceeded expectations. We always did, Olivia replied with a contented smile. Nobody expected us to last, but we never needed their expectations. We had our own. As the moon rose over the land they had nurtured together, Franklin and Olivia Dawson remained on their porch, two figures silhouetted against the soft light from the window behind them. Their shapes, his tall and lean, hers full and generous, formed a single harmonious image against the Texas night, a living testament to a love that had defied predictions, overcome obstacles, and endured through 50 years of shared life. In that moment, as in countless moments before, they were not the cowboy and his obese bride who had shocked Terlingua in 1874. They were simply Frank and Olivia Dawson, a man and woman who had chosen each other every day for half a century, creating a legacy of love that would continue to inspire long after they were gone. And as they had done every night for 50 years, they turned to each other in perfect synchronization and shared a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first embrace and all the depth of their lifelong journey together. In that kiss was the simple truth they had always known, that love, when genuine and nurtured, needs no validation beyond its own enduring presence, a presence that had shaped not just their lives, but the lives of generations to follow. A silent but powerful refutation of all who had ever doubted that what they shared would last.